The morning they came for the cabin, I was standing on the porch, barefoot, coffee in one hand, the other hand steady at my side. The moving truck came first, diesel engine, gravel popping under the tires, loud enough to scatter the jays from the oak tree. My father was in the passenger seat, my mother behind him. Caleb leaned against the tailgate of Mitch's pickup, which pulled in second, towing a flatbed trailer. 4 of them. 2 trucks. A stack of documents in a manila envelope that my father carried like a permission slip. They didn't look up at the porch. They didn't need to. In their minds, this was already done. But I'd been up since 5, and I'd already seen the sedan. It was parked under the elm at the bottom of the hill, gray, quiet, engine off. Arthur Sterling sat in the driver's seat with a leather briefcase on his lap. Deputy Walsh sat in the passenger seat, reading the sports section, his badge clipped to his belt. They'd been there since 4:30. My family brought a truck. I brought a lawyer and a badge. $425,000. 3 years of silence. And they still thought I was the quiet one. I was. That was the problem. To understand why I was standing on that porch, barefoot, calm, watching my own family try to steal my home, you need to know what it was like growing up in that house. My name is Elena, and I was 15 when it started, but the truth is, it started long before that. We lived on the edge of a town where everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew the Vasquez family. My father, Robert, managed the hardware store on Main Street. My mother, Susan, ran the church bake sale every spring like it was a military operation. My brother, Caleb, was 2 years older and played varsity baseball, the kind of kid whose teachers smiled before he even opened his mouth. And then there was me. I was the one who set the table and cleared it, who folded the laundry but never chose what we watched on TV. I got straight A's, and my mother would glance at the report card and say, "That's nice, Elena." Caleb brought home a B- in history, and they took him out for ice cream, because he'd been trying so hard lately. I didn't say anything about that. There was a vase on the mantelpiece, white porcelain, hand-painted, that my grandmother Martha had given my mother as a wedding gift. One afternoon, I bumped it while dusting. It didn't fall, didn't crack, just wobbled. My mother grounded me for a week. You need to learn to be more careful with things that matter. 3 months later, Caleb threw a baseball in the living room and shattered the kitchen window. My father laughed. Boys will be boys. The window cost $412 to replace. I know because I saw the invoice on the counter. Nobody asked Caleb to pay for it. Nobody grounded him. Nobody said a single word about things that matter. Kept a notebook under my mattress. Not a diary. Just a plain composition book. I wrote down the things I noticed, not because I was angry, because I wanted to understand. I was already trying to make sense of the math, why the numbers never added up for me the way they did for everyone else. My grandfather Henry was different. He was the kind of man who could sit on a dock for 3 hours and say 12 words, and every single one of them meant something. He had this cabin out by the lake, 40 minutes north of town. Cedar walls, a porch that faced the water, the smell of pine and old books and whatever Martha was simmering on the stove. When I was 12, Henry took me fishing. We sat on the dock all afternoon, and I caught nothing, not a single fish. I was embarrassed, ready to quit. He said, "Elena, the lake doesn't care if you're patient, but you will." I didn't understand that then. I carried it like a pebble in my pocket for years, smooth, small, heavy with something I couldn't name. Martha died when I was 13. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and quiet and terrible. Henry lasted another 2 years after that, but something in him went quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. He still took me to the cabin, still made his coffee in the same tin percolator, but he started leaving things on the kitchen table for me to find. Letters. In Martha's handwriting, one was about the cabin, how her parents had built it in 1962, how she and Henry had spent their first anniversary there. Another was about money, specific numbers, accounts, what was owed, and what was owned. A third was about me. Elena is the only one who listens, Martha had written. She's the only one who will understand what this place means. Henry never said a word about those letters. He just left them out, one at a time, like breadcrumbs leading somewhere I hadn't arrived at yet. When Henry passed, I was 15, his will was straightforward. The cabin and the surrounding 4 acres of land, appraised at $340,000, plus $85,000 in savings accounts, were to be held in trust for his grandchildren. All of it managed by my father, Robert, as trustee. $425,000, left for Caleb and me. Looking back, I think Henry knew exactly what would happen next. I think that's why he left those letters on the table. He was giving me the blueprint. I just didn't know how to read it yet. I didn't cry at his funeral, not because I didn't grieve, but because I was already doing the math. It started with a soft ask. 6 months after Henry's funeral, my father sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd found Martha's letters, and told me there were some expenses related to the property. Taxes, maintenance, insurance. He said it in the same voice he used when explaining why we couldn't afford a new dishwasher. "We just need to move some things around, Elena. It's what your grandfather would have wanted." I was 15. I didn't know what an irrevocable trust was. I didn't know what fiduciary duty meant. But I knew what Martha's letters said. I knew the numbers. I didn't argue. Then came the transfer documents. My father slid them across the table one evening, a pen on top, and asked me to sign. He said it was routine. He said it was for the trust. He said a lot of things. I didn't sign. I didn't say why. I just said, "I'd like to read them first," and took the papers to my room. That night, I read every word, and what I found made my hands go cold. The notary stamp on page 3 didn't match any notary registered in our county. I knew because I'd seen real ones in Martha's letters, the ones about property transfers, filed properly, stamped properly, everything in order. This stamp was different. Wrong format, wrong seal number. The deed of sale on page 6 listed a transfer date 3 months before Henry died, a transfer Henry never signed. I knew his handwriting. I'd read it in every letter he'd left on that kitchen table. The signature on page 6 wasn't his. It wasn't even close. My father hadn't just asked me to sign away my inheritance. He'd manufactured the paperwork to take it. So the next day, after school, I walked to the public library and sat in the legal reference section until closing. I came back the next day. And the next. I was 16 years old, reading case law about trustee fraud and document forgery in a town where the biggest legal drama was a fence dispute on Birch Street. Nobody noticed. Nobody asked where I went after school. That was the thing about being invisible. It had its uses. By 17, I understood 5 things. 1, my father had been withdrawing from the trust accounts for over a year, small amounts at first, then larger. The $85,000 in savings was down to $31,000. 2, my Uncle Mitch had been involved. He'd co-signed a loan against the cabin's value, using a forged appraisal that inflated the property value by $90,000, a loan my father had never disclosed. 3, Caleb had signed a transfer document without reading it. His signature, right there on page 4, giving Robert expanded authority over the trust. My brother had handed over our inheritance and hadn't even asked what he was signing. 4, the forged deed, the fake notary, the falsified appraisal. They weren't mistakes. They were a system. My father had built a paper trail designed to make the theft look legal, layer by layer, document by document, like a man building a house on someone else's land and expecting no one to check the foundation. And 5, the part that made my stomach turn, I found a bank statement crumpled at the bottom of the recycling bin. $12,000 withdrawn from the trust in 3 separate pulls over 2 months. $7,000 went to Caleb's new car, $3,000 went to a kitchen renovation, and $2,000 went to a catering invoice dated 6 weeks out. A deposit for my 18th birthday party. They were going to throw me a party. With my own inheritance. At the cabin they were trying to steal. I sat in the library that afternoon and stared at the numbers until the lights flickered for closing time. I wasn't angry. I was something worse. I was clear. I didn't confront any of them. Instead, I got a job. The public library was hiring a part-time shelver. $4.25 an hour. I took every shift they offered, and I waited. On the morning of my 18th birthday, my mother made pancakes. Caleb gave me a card he'd bought at the gas station. My father shook my hand and said, "You're an adult now." He had no idea how right he was. By that afternoon, the house was full. Susan had invited the neighbors. Mitch brought a case of soda and a story about a fishing trip that never happened. Caleb was on his second slice of cake. Everyone was laughing. The catering trays were lined up on the counter. The ones paid for with $2,000 from an account that was supposed to be mine. The kitchen behind them had new tile and a farmhouse sink my mother had picked out in July. $3,000. Also mine. And parked in the driveway, catching the late sun, was Caleb's car, $7,000. Mine, $12,000 of inheritance, spread across the room like set dressing for a party I was never really the guest of honor at. I smiled. I ate cake. I said thank you. And then I excused myself to the bathroom. I didn't go to the bathroom. I went to the back porch where Arthur Sterling was waiting in a gray sedan parked behind the shed. Arthur was an estate attorney, the only one within 60 miles who specialized in trustee fraud. His consultation had cost me $275. 12 weeks of shelving books. I'd called him 3 months earlier. He'd been skeptical. "You're 17, he'd said. "Come back when you're 18. So I did. On the exact day. I'd brought him the composition book. Every number, every forged signature I'd identified. Every withdrawal date cross-referenced with bank statements I'd pulled from the recycling bin. Arthur had read it in silence, then looked up and said, "This is the most thorough case file I've ever seen from someone who isn't a lawyer." He had the documents ready. An irrevocable trust, a new one, that transferred all remaining assets back under my control, naming me as sole trustee, plus a formal complaint to the county documenting the forgeries, the unauthorized withdrawals, the fraudulent loan, everything. I signed the trust on the hood of his car while my family sang happy birthday inside the house. It took 4 minutes. I walked back inside, washed my hands, ate a slice of cake. My mother asked if I was feeling okay. I said I was fine. I was more than fine. The clock had started. I just had to wait for them to notice. Arthur didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. He walked to the flatbed trailer, set his briefcase on the edge, opened it, and laid out 6 documents in a row, one by one, like a dealer laying cards on a table. This transfer deed, filed with the county 3 months before Henry Vasquez died, bears a signature that doesn't match any known sample of Mr. Vasquez's handwriting. He tapped the first page. "It's forged." He moved to the second. "This notary stamp, seal number 7734, doesn't correspond to any notary registered in this county or any adjacent county. It doesn't exist." Third page. "This appraisal, co-signed by Mitchell Vasquez, inflates the property value by $90,000 above the county assessor's figure. The appraiser listed here has no license on file with the state." Fourth, fifth, sixth. Each one laid flat. Each one dismantled in 3 sentences or less. My father's face didn't crumble all at once. It went in stages. Confusion first, then recognition, then something I'd never seen on Robert Vasquez's face before. Fear. Caleb was leaning against the tailgate. He'd been watching Arthur the way you watch a car accident, unable to look away. And then he said it, out loud, in front of everyone. "I signed, too. Dad said it was just paperwork. He said it was fine." The silence after that sentence lasted 5 full seconds. I counted. Mitch looked at Robert. Robert looked at the ground. Susan reached for the car door handle and held it like a railing. Deputy Walsh stepped forward. Not fast, not aggressive, just steady. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the property. All of you." The movers looked at each other, looked at the deputy, looked at Robert. Then they started putting the boxes back on the truck. The wrong direction. I stood on that porch the entire time. I didn't say a word, not one. Arthur had the paperwork. Walsh had the badge. And I had 3 years of silence that spoke louder than anything my father ever said. My mother was the last to leave. She sat in the passenger seat of Mitch's truck for a long time, staring at the cabin through the windshield. As Mitch started the engine, she rolled down the window and called out, not to me, but loud enough for Arthur and the deputy to hear. This isn't what Henry and Martha wanted. There was an understanding. Everyone knew it. Arthur didn't react. He just wrote something in his notebook. I drove to the cabin that evening, alone. I walked past the porch, past the kitchen, down the narrow hallway to the closet where Martha kept her things. On the top shelf, behind a stack of old quilts, was a metal lockbox. Plain, scuffed at the edges. The kind she bought at a hardware store 30 years ago. She'd told me where the key was. Once. Quietly, in the kitchen, while everyone else was watching TV. Bottom drawer, behind the tea towels. Don't tell your father. I hadn't opened the box since she died. I slid the key in, turned it, lifted the lid. Inside were folders, each labeled in Martha's handwriting. Taxes, insurance, deeds, medical, correspondence, and one folder I'd never seen before. Family. I pulled it out and opened it on the kitchen table. Henry's table, the same one where I'd found the letters, the same one where my father had asked me to sign away my future. Inside was a single typed page. At the top, in bold, family requests and responses. Henry had typed it, dated it, signed it at the bottom. 3 entries. My father had asked to add family members to the cabin deed. Henry's response, no. Mitch had asked about selling a portion of the land. Henry's response, no. My mother had asked if the cabin could be used as shared family vacation property. Henry's response, no. And at the bottom of every entry, the same line. This cabin is to remain intact. It will transfer to Elena upon our passing. This is not a family asset. They claimed there was a family understanding. Henry had documented 3 separate times that there was no such thing. Underneath the memo was a small envelope, unsealed. My name on the front in Martha's handwriting, 1 sheet of paper. Elena, if anyone pressures you about the cabin or our savings, call Arthur Sterling. Do not sign anything. Do not give keys. Do not explain. Protect the cabin first. We trust you. Arthur sent a formal response to Attorney Fields that afternoon. Attached, the trust summary, the deputy's case number, and Henry's memo. Fields replied within 2 hours. Not an apology. A retreat disguised as professionalism. His clients may have been misinformed about prior agreements and were withdrawing all claims pending further review. There was no further review. The seed my mother planted in the driveway, there was an understanding, had grown just long enough to be cut down by the man she thought she could outsmart. Henry Vasquez, the quietest man in the room, still winning arguments from the other side of the grave. The collapse came in 8 layers. I didn't cause any of them. I just stopped preventing them. Within a week, the whole town knew. Not because I told anyone. Because Deputy Walsh's wife worked at the post office, and the post office was where every story in that town began and ended. Robert Vasquez, the hardware store manager, the church volunteer, the man who coached Little League every spring, had forged documents to steal his own children's inheritance. The narrative he'd built for 20 years collapsed in 72 hours. The hardware store lost 3 of its biggest accounts in 2 weeks. Not because anyone boycotted, because people just stopped coming. They'd cross the street. They'd drive to the next town. They'd find reasons. Robert started closing early, then closing more often, then not opening at all. Susan's name was quietly removed from the church bake sale committee. No meeting, no announcement, just a new flyer that went up on the bulletin board with everyone's name except hers. She found out on a Sunday morning. She sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes before driving home. Mitch's loan defaulted. The bank called it in. The forged appraisal voided the collateral. His business partner, and a man named Gerald, who had trusted Mitch with the books for 11 years, pulled out of their contracting firm within the month. Gerald didn't shout, didn't threaten. He just said, If you'd forged documents to steal from your own niece, what would you do to me?" Mitch didn't have an answer. Caleb came to my room on a Thursday night, sat on the edge of my bed, and said, "I didn't know what I was signing. I didn't know any of it was forged." I believed him. That was the saddest part. He was 20 years old, and he had never once been asked to read the fine print on anything, not a report card, not a permission slip, not a trust document worth $425,000. He had been taught that someone else would always handle the details. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't say anything. I handed him a glass of water. 8 layers. 8 different parts of their lives, and I hadn't said a word to any of them. I didn't need to. The truth had its own weight. I just stopped carrying it for them. My father came to see me 3 weeks after the last layer fell. He drove to the cabin, my cabin now, and parked in the gravel driveway where Henry used to park his truck. I watched him from the porch. He looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner. His shirt was untucked. He walked to the bottom of the steps and stopped. "Elena, please, can we just talk?" I stood on that porch, Martha's porch, Henry's porch, my porch, and I looked at the man who had spent 3 years dismantling everything my grandparents had built, who had forged their signatures, who had used my invisibility as permission, who had mistaken my silence for surrender. I didn't invite him in. I didn't explain. I didn't raise my voice. I said one sentence. "You can talk to Arthur." Then I went back inside and closed the door. Not hard. Just closed it. The way you close a book you finished reading. Mrs. Calloway, Henry's neighbor for 30 years, the woman who had watched me grow up on this porch, was sitting in her garden next door. She saw the whole thing. She told me later over coffee that she'd never seen someone say so little and mean so much. "Your grandmother would have done the exact same thing," she said. That was the only time I cried. The hearing was in October. I was 20 years old. Arthur Sterling presented the evidence in 4 hours. 47 pages, organized by category. Henry's typed memo, family requests and responses. 3 refusals, each dated, each signed. Martha's letter, her handwriting on the envelope, my name on the front. 14 months of account withdrawal records. The fake notary traced to a stamp kit purchased by my Uncle Mitch at an office supply store 40 miles away, paid for by check, with the receipt still on file. The judge asked my father 3 direct questions. He answered 2 of them. For the third, he said he needed to consult with his attorney. The judge looked at him for a long time after that. It took 11 days to reach a verdict. Trustee fraud, confirmed. Document forgery, confirmed. Breach of fiduciary duty, confirmed on 7 of 8 counts. Robert was removed as trustee. Mitch was referred for criminal charges. The cabin and the surrounding 4 acres were returned to the trust in full. The accounts were frozen pending restitution. I stood on the courthouse steps afterward and tried to feel something clean. I felt tired. I felt 20 years old. I felt the specific weight of having been right about something for a very long time. My father called me the night of the verdict. He said one thing. He said, "I hope you're happy." I said, "That's not what this was." He hung up. I have not spoken to my father since. My mother sends cards at Christmas. I send them back with a note that says, "I am well." Caleb and I talk every few weeks. He's a high school history teacher now, 2 towns from where we grew up. He sends me pictures of his classroom sometimes, bookshelves, organized desks, a boy who learned from what he signed without reading it. That was 24 years ago. I'm 42 now. I still live in the cabin. Henry's cabin, Martha's cabin, mine. I replaced the roof in 2014, repainted the porch in 2019. The cedar walls are original. I'll never change those. The percolator broke in 2017, and I bought a new one. Same brand, same tin. It makes the same sound in the morning, that slow gurgle that means the day is starting on my terms. The dock is still there. I sit on it sometimes. I don't fish. I just sit. I planted a garden where Martha's vegetable patch used to be. Tomatoes, basil, a row of sunflowers that face the water. Mrs. Calloway helped me with the soil the first year. She's 87 now, and she still comes over for coffee on Tuesdays. The lockbox is still in the closet. I added a folder of my own. I labeled it Boundaries. Inside is the trust summary, the deputy's case number, Henry's memo, Martha's note, and the withdrawal from Attorney Fields. Some people keep photo albums. I keep proof that I stood my ground. As for my family, Robert paid back $31,000 of the $54,000 he took. The forgery charges were settled out of court. A deal Arthur negotiated. He manages a smaller store 2 towns over. We don't speak. Susan moved to her sister's house in Oregon. She sends a card at Christmas. I read it. I don't reply. Mitch lost the contracting business. Last I heard, he was working for someone else's company. I don't keep track. Caleb called me last year. He said he was sorry. I believe he meant it. We're not close, but we're not strangers. That's enough for now. Looking back, I learned 2 things. The first is that silence is not weakness. Silence, when it's chosen, when it costs you something, when you hold it, even though every part of you wants to scream, silence like that is the loudest thing in the room. The second is that the people who are supposed to protect you are sometimes the ones you need protection from. And when that happens, the only person who can save you is the one staring back at you in the mirror. My grandmother wrote it in a letter I found on a kitchen table 30 years ago. Elena is the only one who listens. She was right. I listened. The lake doesn't care if you're patient, but you will.